Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of Figurative Composition course. In this video, I want to take you through three main things that we will be covering, the general topics. So the first thing that I think is really worth going through is that I have developed a kind of map of the creative process as far as painting and sort of visual art goes, and I find it useful to organize the ways, the different factors that we could be using in our work. It's quite overwhelming, so this is a model about that. I'll talk about that in just a second. There's also a series of, I'll show you on this side, there's actually a series of patterns that I've sort of noticed over the years, and the sort of ways that artworks tend to organize themselves, and that can be useful for helping you to find your way in the process. I'll talk about that in a second as well. The second main topic that we'll be dealing with is really about arrangement. So there's of these different factors that could be that you could potentially include in your artwork. We'll be going through the sort of traditional things of using line and linear design and how that can be used in your work, as well as tone, color, and then some other things which are a little bit more sort of, let's say, higher level than those. And more sort of visual effect. So things like luminosity and sort of the glow of light, the sort of atmospheric effects that you can get in painting, and also sort of spatial effects, the things that can happen that can be very important for the representational painter. So those the ways that you arrange those things can be very meaningful within the picture, and that getting to know them through the types of processes, the types of activities that we're doing in this course is really what we're aiming for. The third thing that we're going to be looking at with this course has to do with, which is a very practical thing, but it seems to have a lot of power, which is generating realism, methods for what aspects of realism really matter in a picture. And what level of realism are you aiming for? So we'll be talking about different ways that you can model the scene that you're trying to paint, and what really matters when you model the scene, whether it's with a real person as your model, or with your with some form of creating a sort of a scene diorama or something like that to look at the light source. So those are the three big things that we'll be going through in this course. Now, just before I finish, I want to talk to you just quickly about these two different models. This is the primary one. I'm calling it the model of plastic composition. So plastic is really a term that is used for the idea of combining shaping things. It really means, so plasticity is related to the shaping or the modeling of things. Now, one of the things that I noticed and sort of became kind of overwhelmed with was the types of options that we have as artists. So in this model, I have these three different core ideas. So one is subject matter. And so subject matter is things from the visual world that you could choose to include or not include. So this could be lighting, it could be story and narrative kind of concepts, it could be the actors that you choose, the types of characters that you're including. There's objects which are symbolic, that can help to tell a story, that can be visually stimulating in some way. Spaces and the types of setting that you want to put this thing. Outside, in a room, is it a mansion or a forest? What is those choices? The second main one is design. And so within design, as I mentioned, we have linear, tonal, and color design. But I would also argue that we have spatial design for the more representational painter. And those things are also very important. The third thing is the media and substrate. Or the sort of material substrate. So the media is something. I'm an oil painter primarily. I use watercolor to some extent. Different media have different strengths and perhaps limitations. And so we'll be looking at drawing media. We'll also be looking at oils. But we'll talk a little bit about the types of things, the types of advantages, and the reason why I'm using oil paint in my painting primarily. However, I do want to point out that this course is not specifically about my process. I mean, presumably, if you're looking at what I'm teaching here, you must somewhat like what I'm doing as a painter. But it's not about what I do particularly. I'm trying to give you a broader context that my work can be fitted into, but that other artists can be as well. And so, you know, I choose certain subjects, I choose certain design patterns that I tend to gravitate towards. They're not right or wrong. They are what has made sense for me and what I've found meaningful. And that's what this is all about, is finding what's meaningful for you. So part of the idea here is that if you then go on to some other person's workshop or course, and sometimes artists have a misguided sense that they are right, I would argue that they might be right, but right for themselves and what they like to do in their own work. And you can sort of then have sympathy for them and say, well, they believe that what they're saying is correct, and understand that it might be correct for you, but it might not be correct for you as well, and where your artwork needs to go. So the second part of this process is about the types of things that we do as artists to work these elements. We've sort of started to pick out what we're going to be including here, and we are starting to weave them together into some satisfying whole. And so this is sort of divided into these different categories, and I'll be talking a little bit about them. We'll be going through each of them in different ways through the course. So sort of the inspiration and the reflection that you might do in developing a picture, the different ways that you can explore the way that you're composing, the actual execution of the final work. I mean, this just making a thing in reality has its own problems, and so that's another part of this. And then resolution. Resolution is a quite mysterious thing, but we sort of know it when we see it. When we get things where they should be, we can say, yes, this is all clicking and the meaning is starting to come through and it feels like there's something working there. It can be a cyclical process. It can be that we do it once, studying a certain subject matter, and then we learn from that, we do it again. It can be that we have to go through this process multiple times just to execute a single work as well. Once the artwork is produced, in a sense, that's beyond the scope of this course, but how it is presented into the world and how it fits, how it then can have its effect in the world, and how the world is influencing various aspects of the creative elements. This is what I'm wanting to get across with this, is so that you're getting a broader context when you go to the museum, or when you go to and when you're thinking about what you might like to do as an artist and where you want to go with this. So that's part number one, right? This sort of map of this visual stuff. So that's the MPC, or the model of plastic composition that I've described here. Now, the next thing that I said I'd talk about is this idea. What I've tried to describe is the idea that there are sort of gradients between different sort of patterns of artwork, and these are not one artist doesn't necessarily just do one thing within this. I'm really more pointing out the idea that an artwork could be said to be more narrative, or it could be said to be more sort of associative, or that's often what a surreal painting is, where you have objects together that you wouldn't necessarily see together, and that contains a meaning. They can be more about observation. A painting can be simply a picture of haystacks under different lighting, and it's really about the process of observation and how clearly you're seeing that. So these sort of quadrants, they're not distinct, clear-cut categories. They're more gradients between ways of approaching painting. And the idea of highlighting these patterns is that you can start to see which ones you're resonating with at this time. Where do you want to go with your artwork? And if you have a sense of which one is most appealing to you, which one gets you excited, then that gives you you can get some guidance from these artworks, from these artists, and see the way that they were thinking, and then think about what an artist of that type tends to do within their artistic process. That's really what this is aiming for. So that's this, and then what I'm calling the quadrant. map. Okay, so that's this idea. So that's the first part. And the second thing that I mentioned there was this idea of arrangement. So that's all the design elements and the sort of practical things that the painter will necessarily deal with. So we've got linear design. Right, well, I'll just say here, arrangement. The practicalities of doing this, the real rubber meets the road kind of stuff that you can start to get the feel of. This is what linear design will be doing in the first session, and then we'll go on to tonal design. Of course, linear design feeds into tone. Okay, so tonal areas are can be defined by lines. You can say, well, this one finishes, the next one starts. That's implying a line. And so these things feed into this. And then color, of course, tone is a component of color. And so these things are all related. And then, as I mentioned before, we have some ideas which are more visual effects in some ways, and they don't strictly speaking fit into these categories. But that includes things like light. It includes spatial sort of effects, and it includes things like atmosphere that are really important for the painter. Things that we can take advantage of to make our image more communicative, to make it more beautiful, to make it more meaningful. And then the final thing that I mentioned just before is this idea of realism. Okay, and how do we model things? How do we make something feel, authentic? A lot of artwork is not strictly, it's not photographic, but it can feel very authentic and convincing, and in fact, be more interesting for being less quote unquote realistic. And then you have examples of artwork which is highly refined and even to the point of looking quite photographic. But how do we get to those different points? What can we use to generate those different effects that give us that feeling of authenticity or convincingness in our artwork? And I think that feeds back into meaning in a strong way as well. That's a very important practical part of what the painter is doing. So that gives you an overview of this course. There's a lot of different activities that we will go through. This is not all about me just talking and lecturing. The reason I'm making this video is because you can rewatch this if you want to, but I'm wanting to spend as much time as I can. I'll do some demonstrations for you, and then I'll just let you go and play with these different activities, because I want you to get the feel of these things. This is a very hands-on course, and I'm trying to save as much time as I can by putting this information, compiling this information for you as a video, and then within the class we'll do as much as we can in the actual activities. So I will see you very soon for the start of lesson 1.